So our first dialogue today is entitled Together We Thrive, Forging Alliances for Impact, and we are joined on stage by Dr. Anino Emuwa, Managing Director of Avandis Consulting and also 100 Women at Davos, and Kirsi Madi, UN Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of UN Women for Resource Management, Sustainability and Partnership. So I think we should start with being realistic, if that's okay. Let's do that, about the overall picture of where women are in the world, and then perhaps we can look towards more optimistic solutions. So when the UN Charter was established, 1945, equality between men and women, it was key. It was a core founding principle. And in 2015, at the UN Conference on Sustainable Development, all 193 members agreed to adopt 17 universal goals, collectively aimed at securing peace and prosperity for people and the planet, and they were aiming to get those by 2030. Number 5, SDG 5, was gender equality. 2 years ago, the UN issued a statement stating that the world was failing women and girls by every measurable criteria, and the dream of equality by 2030 was unobtainable. So, Kirsi, I'm afraid I'm going to have to start with you. It was a very sobering snapshot of where we are at the moment, and how do you see the role of UN Women in making some kind of progress?
Thank you so much, Sandi. And let me just start by, first of all, thanking each one of you for being here, and thanking Cyrille, through you, Cartier, for the tremendous work that you are doing and the commitment that you are demonstrating to realizing gender equality, women's rights, and women's empowerment. And of course, the government of Japan. And this is, as you said, this is a journey, you know, from Dubai, the incredible Expo in 2020, coming here today. It's really a significant moment where we can demonstrate the humanity coming together, all the human beings, regardless of our race, of our religion, of our gender, of our background, and really making sure that the values of humanity, of respect, non-discrimination, and equality, they are at the center of our efforts. So indeed, we are facing major challenges, and the SDG 5 on gender equality is absolutely central for achievement of any of the other SDGs. And when you go through the pavilion, it's really in an incredible way demonstrating the centrality of the SDG 5. Women are half of the population. Women cannot be forgotten. And it's important also to note we've seen a lot of progress. Maternal mortality has declined. Women are able to work and lead. You know, education levels have increased for girls. We still have a lot of dropouts in many countries, but in many countries, girls are really leading in the education, leading in technology. But at the same time, serious challenges exist. Gender pay gap, still today. Women are earning 20% less than men for work of equal value. The violence that women and girls are facing today is still incredible. In the last 1 hour, we've been now here. 6 women have been killed somewhere in the world by their family or intimate partner. This is not counting the women and girls who are killed in the conflicts all around. It's staggering, the levels of discrimination, the lack of still access that women have, the lack of protection is still so visible and is still so tangible. When you think about it, every 10 minutes, a woman is killed by a family member. And this is everywhere in the world. So just to say, I don't want to give a gloomy picture, but there is progress. But there are such a significant challenges. Political participation has increased a lot, but still members of parliament are only about 25% of all parliamentarians. And those who are in the parliaments are often facing really serious harassment, physical harassment, online harassment in this new digital era. So there's so much that we need to do as a global community, and this is why having companies like Cartier, having the Watch and Jewelry Initiative 2030, for example, pushing forward for real tangible changes that we can make when we come together, when public sector, private sector, media come together, we can really have a change. And this is why I'm so delighted that UN Women has been able to collaborate in this endeavor.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to come to Anino. We're going to talk about the subject of leadership, which is clearly needed. You're one of my heroes. I know you work in the world of business and finance, about which I know nothing. But you are so active in trying to accelerate gender diversity in leadership, and you often host events at places like the World Economic Forum in Davos. How would you characterize the general mood of such gatherings?
First of all, I'm delighted to be here, and a lot of familiar faces, but Your Excellencies, delighted that you're all here. Amal, lovely to see you again after a couple of years, and of course the whole Cartier team. The mood of leadership, that's a tough one. We left Davos in January, and that is where world leaders gather in the public sector and the private sector to discuss what's happening in the world and how can we make changes. And a lot more has happened till then. And I think that we are in a context of several things. One, of course, is the global macroeconomics. Are we heading towards a recession in the Western countries? Developing countries, perhaps, lower growth than expected. We're also looking at, climate action, because climate change is real and is happening. Crises, conflicts, it's difficult. So that's the context that we are operating under. And what is clear, simply, is that leadership is no longer one person's job. Leadership is a collaboration, and that is absolutely clear. And what does that collaboration look like? Well, I'll just finish and just say, when you look at the picture of global leadership, when we see the amount of talent we have in the world, I think it's inherently clear that leadership that we have doesn't resemble the talent that is there. So it's not a question of trying to justify what type of leadership we have, but simply, does it represent people in all forms and fashion? And in this context, does it represent women? Because the solutions can only happen if we do have all talent on board. So that is a context. How do we move? And it's a new leadership paradigm that we see unfolding before our very eyes.
Thank you so much. Cyrille, I've known you over many years. You're a great ally for women's empowerment. What do you see the current situation as? It must be, what is yours? It's decades, your association with the Cartier Women's Initiative.
So, as mentioned before, there have been some, I would say, setback. If we say compared to Dubai 2020, the gender gap has widened, and there are some worrying news. But we should not be afraid of setbacks, because we should not think that there is a linear path. These kind of setbacks have been the case in the past as well. So the point is, say, when we all keep our goodwill, then things can be done. Also, it's always a part where we should not think that it's an externality. Oh, too bad there is a recession, too bad there is a government change, too bad there is a strange guy doing some strange things, or some kind of conflict.
I don't know who you're talking about.
No. I'm not talking about anyone, because there are too many that, that it would be difficult to name just one. And then there are also beautiful things happening. And so that's where we say we all have to do something. And we all have the choice. So in some way, when we believe in those values, wherever we are, and sometimes can be distressful, then we have to continue. That's what we have been driven by these convictions for the past 10 years and more, and we can see that many things can be done. So that's a part where we should not be afraid. The world is becoming too fearful, either of making mistakes or of thinking about unknown future, but the future is what we will make. So we have to do this, knowing that it will not happen on its own. So we need to bring all women to the table. But as Amal said also, justice will not come on its own. Justice has to be waged. We have to work for it. Peace will not come on its own. We have to believe in it, and we have to make it happen. And then gender equality comes in our heart, but then it can come as well. So we can be in a period of saying, is it worth it? But yes, more than ever, it's worth it. Because otherwise, we leave all the space to the part which is not so nice. But we can see that we can all do something where we are, public, private, multilateral institutions, and NGOs. There is a room for everyone to do some things meaningful. And the good guys always win in the end.
Yes, absolutely.
That's it.
And my experience over the years is the extraordinary partnerships that spring up that you weren't expecting. So, Kirsi, how do you see the private sector's role in advancing gender equality? Because it's a huge part of what's happening here.
Absolutely key, and I just wanted to continue on what Cyrille was saying. Indeed, it is not the different sectors working separately. It's all of us coming together. And this is where I also believe that the pavilion also is a perfect example of that, and we are so happy to have collaborated in the preparation of the pavilion. Actually, I remember during our first meeting, almost exactly a year ago, when we were discussing and we were able to provide some of the data that UN Women is collecting and analyzing to really monitor the progress and to be able to advocate for the changes. But private sector is absolutely key. And there's no question about it. Private sector is the greatest employer, is the greatest generation of the future in any society. So there's no question about the criticality of private sector's role, absolute criticality. Yes, of course, we need public sector, we need the policies and laws, we need our parliamentarians to take action, we need the civil society to be the voice. But at the end of the day, private sector is the engine of the economy. So critically important, and we've seen when private sector is intentional, like Cartier is intentional, by adopting the women's empowerment principles. We have now 11,000 companies that globally have, in 190 countries that have adopted women's empowerment principles. And I think with Cartier's leadership, again, I'll mention the Watch and Jewelry Initiative. It's wonderful because they are really driving this forward across the sector.
Can you tell us about that? What was it? It was a pilot on gender-responsive procurement, but can you explain what that means exactly?
Yeah, exactly. So just to tell you, so the women's empowerment principles, they are principles that we are asking the CEOs of companies to adopt. And they entail anything, starting from the company's payment policies, work-life balance, parity, the representation at the boards, but also then looking at the whole value chain of the company, looking at the supply chains and procurement. And indeed, we have done some amazing work. The companies and Cartier has been leading the pilot in looking at gender-responsive procurement to make sure that women have the role in the supply and procurement process. What actually has been also very important, very revealing, is that about 45% of various companies are not really aware if women are part of the supply and procurement process. So again, it's a question about knowing, being intentional. And if I can mention one more element on being intentional, just as an example. You all remember the Paris Olympics last summer. Those were the first Olympic Games which were gender balanced, total gender parity. So in one single, but a giant step, the International Olympic Committee decided to provide an equal number of places for female and male athletes to participate. So being intentional, that changed the games forever. So this is significant changes that can be achieved at all different levels in the private sector, but also coming together, the various actors, and looking what is the impact. If you look at the impact of the Olympic Games, for example, being seen, I don't know, 5 billion people in the world. If you look at those, so thinking about what are those impactful events that bring us all together. And this is where Expo is incredible. The fact that we are doing this in Dubai, doing this now in Osaka, and continuing, as we heard from our wonderful architect, continuing the journey forward. So these are critical pieces of the puzzle, of the journey, to make a difference for all of us together.
So while we're talking about business, Anino, this is your specialist area. What importance do you place on what Kirsi was talking about, diverse and inclusive teams in making progress on SDG 5?
Well, the first thing is, what's the context? And a figure here which actually comes from the UN Women. Gender equality is a $7 trillion opportunity. Or you can look at it the other way. It's a 7 trillion cost if we don't get it right. So that is absolutely what is at stake. So here we're talking about not just progress, we're talking about acceleration. And when you want to accelerate things, leadership is the way to go. So movements can come from anywhere, but when you want things to happen quickly, just as Kirsi mentioned, at the Olympics, leadership. And so when you look at leadership, what are we talking about when we say diverse and inclusive? Well, I think when I started off, I talked about representation, so that's the diversity. But one point I think is important to note is very often you might see some studies and they might say, well, diversity didn't lead to outcomes. If you go further, this is some research we've done with a great colleague at Cambridge. When you look and see what's happening within the organizations, if you have tokenism, that is to say, you're putting women or other people from other minority groups into leadership, but you're not actually using their talents by including them in decision making, right? By creating an environment that is inclusive, then you're missing out on that opportunity. So inclusion is the next step to diversity, and it's critically important. But my work here, right, is starting from the top, because that is where we can really accelerate progress if we actually start from intentional leadership, as Kirsi mentioned a short while ago.
So, Cyrille, we're talking about businesses. You represent one of the greatest private businesses in the world. But what we know is that equality benefits everybody, men and women. And I wonder sometimes in business, rather than just saying, oh, it makes everybody happy or it's a nice thing to do, we should say that actually financially it makes sense. Yes. It's a sensible thing to have these coalitions.
It is. And the coalition and also the women empowerment can bring great results. So during the past 10 years, when we have reached for a company, I think the highest, profitability, even also the moment where women are empowered in regions, so whether in the Middle East or here. As June was saying many times, she's a cultural exception, because in this role for luxury in these regions, either it's a kind of a middle-aged European expat or a 65-year-old Japanese man, but not women like her, who is in her middle age, who is the mother of 3 boys and is successful. And the business has doubled and the stature has increased. Something similar in Middle East, where Sophie has been the first CEO in luxury sector, because they know Middle East is too difficult for women. Japan is too difficult for women. Korea is too difficult for women. Russia is too difficult for women. And all these are only in men's mind that we think that what women cannot do. And when they do, they thrive. And so we have gone to the highest sales, prosperity, and stature ever. So we cannot make a direct correlation and think, is it linked to them? But the opposite is true too. So they have not made anything bad. On the contrary, they have great results achieved. But there's the role of a men's leader, also have to empower them and support them. And there are some countries where the forefathers, here we have a delegation of women from UAE, where the forefathers believed in women empowerment. And in 1 generation, 2 generations have come to such a level for women empowerment, equality, safety. We talked to violence, probably Dubai is the safest place to be. And also a representation in government, have one who has been the first finance minister. Look at her, look how happy she is. And a minister for also foreign cooperation and so forth. And I've met also in that country incredible human beings and smart people who are also driven by the greater goods, not just by their own kind of agenda. So when women thrive, things are doing fine. And we should understand that it's for the common good and it's for common prosperity. And we have this concrete example, both in politics and also in our business. And Japan needs the help of UAE to understand how to make the agenda move, because on the gender gap, Japan is quite low. I have 3 daughters, one is Japanese, and we know it might be difficult for her to work here, because the position of women in society is quite hard. Well, she can handle many things, but I think it has to get better for her if she wants to settle here. So that's why I'm also working for her, our daughters.
But it seems to me that no matter what sector you're in, whether you're in government or whether you're in business, wherever you have an exchange of knowledge and data and expertise at the table, everybody is going to do better. And you're nodding at me. Do you agree? Yeah, and Kirsi, but presumably when you sit at the table, it doesn't matter what you are trying to achieve in that moment. If you have a wide range of expertise at the table, you're going to have a more interesting outcome.
No, absolutely. I mean, the criticality of the different views. I mean, we have examples also in the private sector where there has been blooming companies, global companies, who were really innovative and creative and were doing well. And then decline started. And I was speaking with one of the former CEOs of such company who said, actually, Kirsi, the decline and the challenges started when we all started thinking alike. So that level of creativity, that level of different perspectives, so diversity and the diverse views and diverse backgrounds is absolutely critical in whatever sector we are, that we are creating that space. And I wanted just to add to that what Anino was saying, because we talk, of course, at the UN, at the heart, we talk about the values. We talk about the critical UN core values and why UN, United Nations, was established 80 years ago, and why UN Women was established to really promote gender equality and women's empowerment. But at the same time, I always remind colleagues also that it's not only about the values, it's not only about the rights, it's also a pure business sense, like Anino was saying. It's very, very clear. We are hosting also what is called an Unstereotype Alliance, which is an alliance of particularly media and advertising companies, but also other companies. Cartier is part of it, which are doing a lot of advertising. And it's a platform for the companies to come together and really fight against harmful stereotypes. And as part of this Unstereotype Alliance, we launched actually last autumn a report that was done by Oxford Side Business School, where the result was resounding. When the advertising was showing inclusion, inclusive advertising, the longer-term sales increased by 16%. The customer loyalty increased by 15%. So while we are hearing all this negative noise, let's stay focused. Let's stay focused and join really our forces for that positive future, because it is the positive future is the key.
And Anino, do you have any examples of such companies or alliances that have helped towards progress?
Yes, I do, but just before I talk about that,
Yes.
and I think it's important to talk about the elephant in the room, because Kirsi has talked about the opportunity. But if you have the biggest companies in the world, extremely bright people running those companies, then the question is, but don't they know this? So why isn't change happening when we have the data and we have the figures? Well, it's historic, or it's historical. The workplace was created really, modern workplace, roots of sort of 200 years of the Industrial Revolution. And it represented the workforce that it had in those days. Now, a lot of that has been institutionalized in not only processes, but in cultures. And that culture is every one of us. And that we hold in ourselves unconscious biases, and we don't realize that. 2, we have ways of working that have been created based on 200 years, and even academic study and management studies were based on that. And it becomes extremely difficult to dismantle. And when we're talking about gender equality, what we're actually doing is trying to find a work around that system. I bet you if we had the level of education we had in today's world, right, and we're creating the workforce and creating jobs and creating offices, we wouldn't design them the way that they are right now. So that is a problem, and that is why we need to take a lot of concerted action to change institutions, and by institutions, I mean ways of doing things. So that is really the big issue, and which is why we need this collaboration. But if we talk about examples, well, I have to talk about the Watch and Jewelry Initiative, of which I'm a proud board member, because it is an industrial alliance. And it's an alliance that has now, it's 3 years old, almost 3 years old, and it's 3 years ago it started, and we have 76 members, and 50 of those members have signed the WEPs, the Women Empowerment Principles. And this is an association or an alliance of companies that are very often actually in the marketplace competitors. But don't worry, we have antitrust laws as well, or processes as well. Because the industry realizes that you can't do it on your own. So it is critically important to have those kinds of alliances, right? We have work plans, we do quite a lot to make sure that even the smallest organizations that don't have resources don't have to worry about it, because this is something that we provide through leadership, learning pathways, etc. So that is one example.
That's a wonderful
Yes.
one, and one that I would certainly look into. I'm afraid we are out of time for this panel. Cyrille, I'll leave you to have the last word. Shall we started on a gloomy note. Shall we end on a positive one?
Well, I guess we have to move to the next panel.
We do.
But I say the positive note is that working together can really work everywhere. So there's no need to be too gloomy. And for the thing we said at the beginning, so this space is entirely safe. And here women are loved. And if we are all driven by business acumen, but also love, things can go quite well. So and thank you for the cooperation we have for and for the Women's Initiative and for the can't say the Watch and Jew initiative as well, because Anino is part of this gender part and working together with the Kirsi.
Thank you to our wonderful panel. How lovely.